The sun had not yet risen over the eastern mountains of Afghanistan, but the valley below was already alive with the sound of boots on hard-packed earth. A combined unit of American Navy SEALs and allied Afghan commandos moved in single file along a dry river bed. Their mission was a standard one: locate a high-value target linked to a series of deadly ambushes on coalition supply routes. What they did not know was that they were walking into a trap designed with cold, mathematical precision. 200 meters above them, hidden among a jumble of limestone boulders, lay a young woman who had already seen more war than most soldiers twice her age. Her name was Sergeant Azita Kaderi, though her enemies knew her only as the Lady of the Mountains. She was not Afghan by birth, but she had married into a family of fighters from the Panjshir Valley, a region famous for never having been conquered. After her husband was killed by a roadside bomb, Azita had done something unthinkable. In her conservative village, she had taken his rifle and joined a local militia aligned with coalition forces. She was not officially a sniper, but she had a gift. Her eyes could read wind currents like a sailor reads waves. Her patience was infinite. On this particular morning, Azita was not acting alone. She had been coerced. 2 weeks earlier, insurgent fighters had surrounded her mother's small mud brick house and given Azita an ultimatum: kill 3 American soldiers, or they would execute her mother, her younger sister, and her 4-year-old nephew. They had chained her mother's hands to a wooden beam to prove their seriousness. Azita had spent the last 14 nights unable to sleep, calculating and recalculating a plan that felt like walking off a cliff. The insurgent commander, a man with a patchy beard and dead eyes named Ruhala, had placed her in this specific perch. He knew a SEAL patrol would pass through the canyon below. He gave her a Russian-made Dragunov sniper rifle, a weapon she had used only twice before in training. He loaded the magazine himself 7 rounds. 7 shots, he whispered, his breath sour with tobacco. Make each one count. We will be watching your family. Azita lay prone on the cold rock, the rifle's bipod digging into the dirt. Through her scope, she watched the patrol approach. She could see their faces clearly. They were young. One of them had a freckled nose and wore a wedding ring. Another was chewing gum and laughing silently at something his teammate had said. They were not enemies to her. They were fathers, brothers, sons. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, not the trigger. She prayed to a god she was no longer sure was listening. The first shot was not hers. A crack split the air from the opposite ridge. A bullet slapped into the rock face beside the freckled soldier, spraying him with stone shrapnel. The patrol exploded into motion, diving for cover behind a low stone wall. Ruhala had stationed a backup team. He had never trusted Azita to follow through. Now, chaos reigned. The SEALs returned fire, their M4 carbines barking angrily into the dawn. The insurgents on the opposite ridge fired back with PKM machine guns. Azita had a choice. She could slide back from the ledge, disappear into a gully behind her, and try to rescue her family later. Or she could do what Ruhala expected. She saw the muzzle flashes from the enemy ridge. She saw the SEALs pinned down, one of them bleeding from a graze on his shoulder. Then she saw Ruhala himself emerge from behind a boulder on her side of the canyon, gesturing wildly at her, pointing at her mother's village in the distance. The message was clear: shoot, or they die. She took a breath. She centered the crosshairs not on the SEALs, but on a fuel tank strapped to the back of an insurgent motorcycle hidden near the enemy ridge. It was a difficult shot nearly 800 meters, with a crosswind. She squeezed the trigger. The Dragunov roared. The fuel tank exploded in a fireball that engulfed 3 insurgents. The SEALs paused, confused. Who had taken that shot? Ruhala saw it. His face turned purple with rage. He screamed something Azita could not hear over the gunfire, then raised his own weapon, an American M16 stolen from a dead soldier, and aimed it at her. He fired twice. The first round hit the rock inches from her face, sending chips of stone into her left eye. The second round struck her in the right shoulder, spinning her onto her back. She tried to rise, but her arm would not work. Blood soaked through her gray tunic. Through her blurred vision, she saw Ruhala advancing, flanked by 2 fighters. He was going to finish her himself. Azita rolled onto her side and fired the Dragunov one-handed. The recoil slammed into her wounded shoulder like a sledgehammer, but she saw Ruhala stumble. She had hit him in the thigh. He went down, cursing. Then the 2 fighters opened fire. 7 rounds. That was all she had loaded. She had fired one at the fuel tank. 2 wild shots from Ruhala. Her one-handed shot at him. Now, the fighters emptied their rifles into her position. The first bullet tore through her left thigh. The second shattered her pelvis. The third punctured her right lung. The fourth, fifth, and sixth hit her vest. One lodged against a ceramic plate, 2 more tore through fabric and into her abdomen. The seventh shot caught her in the left side of the neck. The impact flopped her over like a rag doll. The last thing Azita saw was the sky turning a soft, indifferent blue. She felt no pain, only a spreading coldness, as if she were being filled with ice water. Then everything went dark. The SEALs below had used the distraction of the explosion and the gunfire aimed at the ridge to reposition. They called in a drone strike that obliterated the insurgent position on the opposite ridge. The surviving fighters, including the wounded Ruhala, fled into a network of caves. The canyon fell silent except for the crackle of burning wreckage. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb led his team up the steep slope to the shooter's perch. They expected to find a dead enemy sniper. What they found was a young woman lying in a lake of her own blood. Her face was turned to the side, eyes half open. Her chest did not rise. Marcus had seen enough bodies to know a corpse when he saw one. "She's gone," he said to his medic, a grizzled veteran named Tony, but Tony knelt anyway. It was a habit. He placed 2 fingers on her neck, searching for a pulse where the 7th bullet had passed through. He felt nothing. He leaned closer, pressing his ear to her lips. Then he sat up sharply. "She's breathing," he said. "Barely. But she's breathing." Marcus stared at him. "That's impossible. 7 shots. Look at her, Tony." Tony was already ripping open his medical kit. "I don't care what I see. I know what I feel. Get the litter. Now." They rolled her onto a plastic stretcher, and the blood that poured from her wounds was so dark it looked like crude oil. Tony shoved packing gauze into the hole in her neck, sealed it with an adhesive chest seal, and slapped a tourniquet on her thigh so tight the buckle groaned. He inserted a needle into her chest to release the pressure building from her collapsed lung. The whole time, Azita did not flinch. Her body was already shutting down, preserving the last sparks of life for whatever came next. The SEALs carried her down the mountain under fire from scattered insurgents who had regrouped. They moved fast, taking turns holding the stretcher over their heads as they waded through a freezing river. A Black Hawk helicopter met them at a landing zone marked only by a smoke grenade. The crew chief looked at Azita's wounds and shook his head. "You sure this one's worth it?" he asked Marcus. Marcus looked down at the woman. Her hand was hanging off the stretcher, palm up, as if asking a question. On her forearm was a tattoo, a small, badly drawn mountain lion. "She took out an ammo cache for us," Marcus said. "She's worth it." The helicopter lifted off, and the medic in the air began transfusing 2 units of O-negative blood directly into Azita's bone marrow because her veins had collapsed. The needle went into her shin. She did not move. At the military hospital at Bagram Airfield, a trauma surgeon named Dr. Sanjay Patel took one look at the CT scans and called for 3 more units of blood. "Her pelvis is powder," he told the operating team. "Her lung is shredded. The neck wound missed her carotid artery by 2 millimeters. 2 millimeters. That's not luck. That's a miracle." The surgery lasted 11 hours. They removed bullets from her abdomen, reconstructed her pelvis with titanium plates, and sewed her lung back together like a torn sail. Twice, her heart stopped. Twice, they shocked it back into rhythm. When Dr. Patel finally closed the last incision, he wrote in his notes, "Patient survival is medically inexplicable. Recommend transfer to Landstuhl for further care." That night, Marcus Webb sat in the hospital waiting room, still in his blood-stained uniform. He had not slept in 48 hours. A nurse came out and told him the woman had opened her eyes for 3 seconds. She had not spoken, but she had looked at the ceiling and then closed her eyes again, as if taking a mental photograph. 2 weeks later, Azita Kaderi was flown to Germany. She was still unconscious, still breathing on a ventilator, still a mystery wrapped in bandages. The doctors told Marcus that even if she woke up, she would never walk again. The nerve damage was too severe. The pelvic reconstruction might not hold. She would likely need lifelong care. Marcus visited her before she left. He stood by her bed, looking at her bruised face, the tubes coming out of her nose, the 4 lines in both arms. He reached out and touched her hand. Her fingers twitched. He told her, quietly, I don't know your name, but you saved my men. So I'm going to find out who you are. And I'm going to make sure you don't get forgotten." He walked out of the room. And the door clicked shut behind him. The room in Landstuhl Regional Medical Center was small and smelled of antiseptic and old flowers. For 3 weeks, Azita Kaderi had drifted in and out of consciousness like a boat adrift on a foggy sea. She had dreams, if they could be called dreams, of her mother's hands kneading bread, of her nephew's laughter, of the cold bite of the mountain wind. And she had nightmares. In those, she heard the shots again. 7 of them. Each one a door slamming shut. On the 22nd day, she opened her eyes and kept them open. The ceiling was white. A machine beeped beside her. A tube ran down her throat, and when she tried to cough, pain exploded in her chest and her neck and her hip all at once. A nurse rushed in. A kind-faced German woman with blonde hair pulled into a bun. "You're awake," the nurse said in English. "Do you know where you are?" Azita shook her head slightly. The nurse explained. "A hospital, Germany. She had been shot." Yes, Azita remembered that. 7 shots. But she had not expected to remember anything after the 7th. She had accepted death. It had felt quiet. Why was she still here? Over the next several days, the doctors removed the breathing tube, and Azita began to speak in a raspy whisper. She did not tell them everything at first. She said she was a militia fighter. She said she had been betrayed. She did not mention her mother, her sister, or her nephew. She was terrified that Rohala might still be alive, that he might have contacts even here, that speaking their names would put them in more danger. Then, one afternoon, a man in civilian clothes walked into her room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He introduced himself as Senior Chief Marcus Webb. Azita did not recognize him at first. He was not wearing a uniform or body armor. But when he said, "You took a shot at a fuel tank from 800 meters, she remembered. He was one of the soldiers below. The ones she had been ordered to kill. Her heart monitor beeped faster. Marcus pulled up a chair. He did not ask her why she had helped them. He already suspected. Instead, he told her what had happened after she fell. He told her about the firefight, the drone strike, the pursuit of the surviving insurgents. He told her that Rohala had been captured 3 days later in a cave, trying to amputate his own infected leg with a pocket knife. He was now in a military prison, and he had confessed to everything, including the threats against Azita's family. Then they're safe. Azita whispered. Her eyes were wet. Marcus nodded. Your mother and sister are in a safe house in Kabul. Your nephew is with them. They're being protected by coalition forces. He paused. They've been asking about you every day. They thought you were dead. Azita turned her face to the wall. She did not cry, she had forgotten how, but her shoulders shook. For the first time since she had taken up her husband's rifle, she let herself feel afraid. Not of bullets, not of death, but of what came after. She was a woman who had done a man's job in a world that did not forgive women for stepping out of line. When she returned to Afghanistan, if she returned, what would her village say? They would call her a traitor for not killing the Americans, or they would call her a whore for being saved by them. There was no word in her language for what she was, a survivor. Marcus seemed to read her thoughts. He leaned forward and said, I've been talking to some people. There's a program for refugees. You don't have to go back. You can come to the United States, get surgery, learn to walk again, start over. Azita looked down at her legs, lying motionless under the thin hospital blanket. The doctors had told her she might never walk. The titanium plates in her pelvis felt like foreign objects, cold and unyielding. What kind of life would she have in a country where she did not speak the language, did not know the customs, did not have a single friend? But what kind of life would she have in Afghanistan, where every rock and every shadow would remind her of the day she died and came back? She asked for 1 week to decide. During that week, a strange thing happened. Word of her story spread through the hospital, then through the military network, then to a journalist who wrote an article for a small base newspaper. The article was picked up by a wire service. Within days, Azita Kaderi was no longer a nameless, faceless casualty of war. She was the sniper who refused to die. People sent letters. Soldiers she had never met left notes at the hospital front desk. A retired general donated money for her medical care. A physical therapist in San Diego offered her services for free, but not all the attention was good. A video surfaced online, filmed by an insurgent on a phone, showing Azita's body lying in the rocks, blood pooling around her head. The caption read, "American dogs try to save a dead woman. She is with Allah now." The video had millions of views. In the comments, some people called her a hero. Others called her a traitor to her faith. Death threats appeared on social media, directed at her family. Azita watched the video once, on a laptop Marcus brought to her room. She watched herself die. It was like looking at a stranger. That woman on the ground, with the gray face and the empty eyes, that woman had given up. But the woman in the hospital bed, with the titanium pelvis and the scarred lung, she was still fighting. She did not know why. But she was. On the 7th day, she gave Marcus her answer. "I will go to America," she said. "But not because I am afraid. Because I want to walk again. And when I want to walk into a room full of people who tried to kill me, and I want them to see that they failed." 6 months later, Azita arrived at Chicago O'Hare International Airport in a wheelchair. The cold hit her first, a dry, biting cold that reminded her of the mountains. Then the noise hit her, the announcements over loudspeakers, the rumble of luggage wheels, the chatter in a language she was still learning. She held a small bag on her lap containing her only possessions, a photograph of her husband, a prayer rug, and the bullet that had been removed from her neck. Now mounted on a chain. Marcus met her at the gate. He was in civilian clothes again, holding a sign that said, "Indari, welcome home." Azita did not correct him. She did not know where home was anymore. But this place, this loud, cold, strange place, had offered her a second life. And she intended to use it. She spent the next year in a rehabilitation facility in Colorado. The work was brutal. Every day, a therapist named Lena made her stand in a metal frame, using her arms to lift her body while her legs dangled uselessly. She cried more times than she could count. She screamed into pillows. She asked herself, over and over, why she had survived when better people had not. Lena had no answers. She only said, "Pain means you're still here. Use it." One afternoon, 15 months after the shooting, Azita stood without the frame. Just for 3 seconds. Her legs shook like jelly. Her hips screamed. But she stood. Lena clapped. Marcus, who had driven 6 hours to watch, put his head in his hands and cried. 2 years after that, Azita walked into a courtroom in Virginia. Ruhala had been transferred to American custody for trial on war crimes charges. He sat behind a glass barrier, his face gaunt, one leg amputated below the knee. When he saw Azita walk through the door slowly, with a cane, but walking, his mouth fell open. She walked to the witness stand, sat down, and looked at him without anger. She told the court everything. The ultimatum. The 7 shots. The cold ground. The SEALs who did not leave her behind. Ruhala was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. As the guards led him away, he turned and spat in Azita's direction. She did not flinch. She had been hit by worse. Today, Azita Kaderi lives in a small apartment outside Denver. She works part-time as a translator for Afghan refugees. She walks without a cane now, though she has a slight limp. She still has the Dragunov bullet on a chain around her neck. She does not wear it as a trophy. She wears it as a reminder that death is not always the end. Sometimes, it is just a comma in a sentence that keeps going. On quiet nights, she calls her mother on a crackling satellite phone. Her mother is still in Kabul, still baking bread, still waiting for peace. Her nephew is 10 years old now. He knows his aunt is a sniper. He asked her once if she was scared when she was shot. Azita told him the truth. "Yes," she said, "but I was more scared of not trying." She has not spoken to Marcus Webb in 6 months, but he sends her a birthday card every year. On the inside, he writes the same thing each time. 7 shots. 1 breath. You made it count. Sometimes, late at night, Azita stands at her window and looks at the mountains on the horizon. They are not her mountains. These are softer, greener, less jagged. But when the wind blows, she closes her eyes, and for a moment, she is back in that canyon. She feels the cold rock under her belly. She hears the crack of the rifle. And then she opens her eyes, and she is here, in a world that almost forgot her. She walks to her kitchen, makes a cup of tea, and sits down to live another day. That, she has learned, is the greatest revenge of all.